Hello, once again, and welcome to Third Eye Africa TV. We are facing democracy in Nigeria, and we feel yes, we should discuss democracy. And therefore, the program is Democracy in Action. My name is Ben Shaman, and we shall be looking at some actions. Do I say inactions too? On the side of the government. When I say government, the Nigerian government, it has decided to give clemency, some amnesty to around 175 Nigerians, some as far back as 1913. Great. 2025, they have been forgiven today. The lawyers will say tabula rasa. Go, sin no more. Your heart is as clean as that of a baby. But that has generated quite a lot of comments, sentiments on the side of Nigeria. Why should somebody who committed murder, they are involved in terrorism, and sentences are being reduced? Is it okay? We want to look at many of these and more. Not forgetting the fact that Nigeria now has a new umpire. I'm talking of a senior advocate of Nigeria. I'm talking of a professor of law, a lecturer. Why don't we talk about Omnipotent Joash? He is the new helmsman, even though waiting to be appointed. My name is Ben Shaman. We discuss all of that. My guest is a lawyer, very vibrant, a human rights activist, sometimes in the streets, telling Nigerians what ought to be, telling government the truth. He speaks truth to the government. I'm talking of Barrister Frank Tietie. You are not new to this studio. You're welcome once again.
Thank you, and my pleasure.
Yes. Yeah. Some people are smiling, some are sad. There's clemency given by President Tinubu to about 175 people. Some, in fact, Herbert Macaulay, 1913, was jailed by the colonialists over some irregularities. And so let's start from there. The colonial law, and today he's forgiven. What relevance is that?
Oh, well, in the case of Herbert Macaulay, I find it curious. Maybe the government should have just been silent about this. Because right now people are asking, so did Herbert Macaulay, the famous nationalist, who could have been the first president of Nigeria, post-independence, independent Nigeria in terms of Republican president? You know, I find the issue of pardoning Sir Herbert Macaulay to be very fascinating, quite interesting and curious. Many people thought, and I belong to that same school of thought, that perhaps the man's memory should have just been left like that and intact. Not many people go to Wikipedia to search about him. They only know that he is Nigeria's foremost nationalist. He was supposed to be our first Republican president, but he died just before the time for independence, and because of that, his protege, who was also his assistant, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, took over the NCNC, and so the coalition would now eventually produce the first Republican president in 1963. No doubt, he was the crown surveyor in Lagos, in the British colony of Lagos. And when we say colony, which means Lagos was actually part of, Great Britain, who were the colonialists who had annexed Lagos earlier and made it a colony of Great Britain. While the rest of the area we now call Nigeria was known as the Protectorate of Southern and Northern Nigeria, which we know ultimately was amalgamated in 1914. They would have left the memory of Herbert Macaulay because we have accorded him about the highest honor at a time where the most popular Naira note in Nigeria was the 1 Naira note. His face was imprinted as the emblem of the 1 Naira note. Even though it's gradually phased out now because the 1 naira is now coined, and we'll no longer see those minted coins. It seems as if the man is forgotten history. But if you come to Lagos State or right here in Abuja, you'll find that some of the most popular streets are named after Albert Macaulay himself. And and then he also enjoyed a very, great, family background. He's a grandson of Ajayi Crowther, the slave boy who later became the first African bishop. So meaning crisscrossing places like Sierra Leone. Now, but you see, it's important that this is pronounced only if it goes to the effect that nobody can ever mention that Herbert Macaulay had a bad past initially, because he was once accused as the Crown Surveyor, what you know now as Surveyor General of the Queen in Lagos State. He was accused of awarding lands to himself and granting lands to his friends and selling them for profit and all that. He had a lot of problems. But he turned against the colonial government, campaigned against colonialism, and contributed significantly in terms of the foundational cause to the independence of Nigeria. He's a great man. He's a great man.
Okay. Now, we also having people like Mariam Sanda. I recall she had a murder case against her husband, and suddenly, she was sentenced to death by hanging. And today it's been taken to life imprisonment. Now, the family of the husband, the husband's family, is now saying, look, this is not justice at all. Where the Mariam family is celebrating, they are still nursing some psychological wounds. How do you gauge that legally?
Well, it's sad, but let's just first of all consider something very important. You gave a figure of 175 persons who have enjoyed the president's prerogative of mercy. Interestingly, the provision of the Constitution that upon which the president can exercise his powers is to grant clemency or prerogative of mercy is actually section 175 of the Constitution. So probably somehow, if it's a coincidence, fine. But somehow someone was trying to make a point by saying let's now begin to give this very, very unprecedented number of persons receiving state pardon, presidential pardon. We haven't had this number in the history of this country. It is the highest. In fact, one thought, and from observations in the last 65 years of independence, is that presidential pardons are given sparingly. But this time around, they were given in such a manner that no doubt have created a lot of controversy. The case of Mariam Sanda, it strikes home to a point where it seems as if connections play a high, degree, or rather, I would say, played a high degree of influence in this exercise of the presidential prerogative of mercy. Why do I say so? There are many spousal homicides, spousal murders across the country. The famous gospel musician, was a female musician who was said to have been killed by her husband. Osinachi or so. Yeah. But I'm also aware of a very sad one, which involved somebody that was closer home. I'm talking about Edo Delta in the case of Tietie Odibe, whose lawyer, both lawyers anyway, both were married, but the lawyer wife not only stabbed and killed him, but gruesomely cut off an important part of his body in protest of against his supposed infidelity. But in the case of Mariam Sanda, it's strange because this is not so long ago where the country, woke up to the grief and gripped with, the tragedy of, a spouse killing, a female spouse, this time killing the husband because in his sleep, for that matter. Nowhere should a man feel safe other than his house. Nowhere should a man actually feel safe and in the hands of no one else than his wife. And to think that why he was so defenseless, lying down, and he took the police very strenuous, exercise to be able to prove her guilt. And then, having been convicted, one would have expected that the goal of criminal law should have been, achieved with some punishment that would serve as deterrent. What we must appreciate as we move forward is that nobody can question the president's right to exercise, the power to pardon anybody whatsoever. In fact, the pardon is only meant for people who have actually been offenders, who have actually been convicted. So the expectation is that these persons, however serious that their offenses or their convictions were, once pardoned by the president, it stands. And so the list goes on endlessly in terms of controversy. Are you referring to Farouk Lawan or to certain kidnappers or to certain persons who have been convicted of drug trafficking, or clearly persons who have been involved in trying to sabotage the Nigerian state by being terrorists, So this pardon actually by the president has been the most controversial of all. Nigerians are struggling to find the basis why the president exercised such powers in the manner he has done.
Now, we also, when it comes to, justice of this nature, people will talk of victimology. Where is the justice for the victim? Where is the justice for society? And where is the justice against the accused or criminal? Some people are saying that no matter the morals, that the law ought to be followed fully.
I think where the president made the mistake is that previously under Obasanjo and President Yaradua, President Goodluck Jonathan, there used to be committees that are set up to advise the president on his exercise of prerogative of mercy. I recall my former Director General at the law school, Dr. Kole Abayomi, was once the head of the advisory committee on the presidential prerogative of mercy. Now, with such seasoned lawyers, jurists, and experts that have come together, whether they are political experts or sociologists, journalists who are able to, give sound and dispassionate advice to the president, one would have thought that in that case, the president's decision would have, escaped or avoided this controversy that is now trailing his exercise of the powers to issue presidential pardon. I think that's where the president got it wrong. He didn't have a committee of eminent persons, whether they are jurists, lawyers, or elder statesmen, to advise on the list. There was that.
But there was the National Council of State.
Oh no, that is a constitutional requirement. And you see, when the law requires that you consult in a certain body, it doesn't specify the mode of consultation. It could just be that he presented a list of them, and whatever they say would really not matter. But the law only requires that, please, let it be that you had the opportunity to hear whatever they say, but do whatever you want to do. So that does not really. The Council of State members are not usually very active civil society players. For example, they are usually political leaders, governors, past presidents, and the Chief Justice of Nigeria. These people are, deep in their responsibility. I'm talking about responsibility as public servants, and may not be very much in touch with the happenings to be dispassionate enough to give an objective advice to the president. But however, whatever advice they give at that stage can only have effect if the president chooses to accept it or not.
Now, this issue, we spoke about, you listed members of the National Council of State to also involve the governors. And these are people who have also refused to sign the death warrant, those on death row, for example. Could it be that, okay, why is it that these people, okay, you've not signed anything, so why therefore do you allow them to stay psychologically for this long? Every day that wakes up, you just believe that, oh, they can hang me today. I wake up, you can hang me the following day.
You know, Nigeria is as a retentionist country, that's a country that still retains the death penalty, like the United States and countries like China. There is a reason why we keep the death penalty. We keep the death penalty because it is a measure of how much we value life. We believe that the justice of a life taken can only be, achieved when the life taken unjustly, another life who took another life. I mean, let me put it this way: a person who takes a life unjustly can only pay for such with his own or her life.
An eye for an eye.
Yes, not necessarily so. It's justice in the sense that when you know that the value of a Nigerian life is equal to your own life, I think the expectation is that care will be exercised in the way you drive, in the way you get angry. Not only care, but restraint will be applied, knowing that it is a matter of your own survival. So I think there's a justification for the death penalty being retained in these countries. But it's just that the penalty of death is restricted in Nigeria more than in other countries like China and even in the United States. In Nigeria, it's only when it's treason and armed robbery that results to death, to murder, and all that. So, but in cases where a place like China, some kind of public corruption, can be visited with the death penalty. So, for governors who have not signed the death warrant, it's because it's purely psychological. It's not easy as a governor to take a pen to say you are now authorizing the death of someone who has been on death row before you were elected. And that's where the problem is. The problem is when previous governors when they have not had sufficient courage to sign the death penalty, to sign a death warrant, I would say, it becomes very difficult for the incoming governor to now immediately sign a death warrant. And he keeps it aside till he gets to his own tenure. And when he loses election or he wins election, the truth about it is that he lacks that, will, that political will to sign. So that's why we have a lot of inmates on death row. Nevertheless, I think that it makes a lot of sense that Nigeria has observed a certain moratorium on the death penalty for a long time as a result of campaigners in the human rights field. And then, when Nigeria usually goes to United Nations Forum, particularly at the United Nations Human Rights Council, one thing that they keep getting, Nigeria keeps getting from other members of the United Nations is that remove the death penalty and allow, and then also abrogate the Same-Sex Prohibition Act of 2015. These are things that Nigeria finds very difficult. I know Nigeria has softened up by saying, okay, we are placing a moratorium on the death penalty. And that's the reason why people like Mariam Sanda are alive. If there was no moratorium, because it's a sort of policy of the federal government to impose a certain moratorium, and that on death penalty. That's why we have not seen executions. I would say the moratorium is on executions, not on really death penalty, because death penalty has been applied by the courts, but the executions have been withheld by the federal government because of a moratorium, which I know has been influenced by the campaigns and the international community, international NGOs like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and all that, urging governments in Africa and other places to put a hold on the death penalty or death execution of inmates or in death row.
So it took the courage of Adams Oshomole then, when he was governor. I think so it happened to a woman who was killed, murdered, and dismembered and put in a bag or something. That angered the governor. I mean, imagine the temperament of the governor that time.
Yeah, because the truth is that I believe strongly that a retentionist country like Nigeria, needs to send a strong message to its own people that human life is valuable. But when you now think of how much life is lost in conflict places in northern Nigeria, in northeast Nigeria, in north central, with the invasion of herders and with insurgents like Boko Haram and ISWAP and all of that, how much it appears as if life is so cheap. It becomes painful that people that have gone through the process of justice and now be convicted are on death row, whereas those who, cold-bloodedly go about killing Nigerians are yet to be brought to justice. It's sad. If we are retaining the death penalty, it's because we want to show how valuable human life is. Unfortunately, there are so many persons walking free today as insurgents, as headsmen who have, headsmen militia, I would say, that have constituted a serious menace to the security of Nigeria, killing people without consequences. The government should also step up to see to it that these persons are brought to face justice. And when such persons are also given the swift execution of any death penalty, then the true message of the value of human life will actually be sent across and people will get the message.
And closely associated to what you're saying, in terms of the pressure from the international community, they'll say, okay, like the military, you have to catch some people, the terrorists, ISWAP, or whoever they are, who are busy killing here and there, that you don't just also kill them, you catch them and you try them. So how do you catch a man who is already armed, he has entered a place of worship, and he's killing?
No.
Indiscriminately.
No. You see, we need to balance it with the principle of self-defense. And the principle of self-defense, also, connotes the use of proportionate force to defend human life and property. In combat situation, the expectation is that those, especially in law enforcement, have legitimate rights to take out any threat, whether it's a human threat or any form of threat, in terms of remote attacks, like throwing bombs, shooting, which requires shooting down a plane or taking out the threats. So it's important that we know that, and that our security forces, whether the police or the armed forces, are capable and at every time ready to neutralize any human being that is capable of taking the life of another unjustly. Unfortunately, we don't have that. We see all this mayhem going on, and they wreak this damage, and they go back in motorcycles. Sadly, from wherever they come from in the forest and all that. And it seems as if impunity is reigning. And that's where the real problem is. That's where Nigerians really get, troubled. That it seems as if, justice does not only proceed from the court. It is fair and just for a soldier to take out a real present danger of of a threat that is to anybody or to a community. But we didn't see that happening in Delhi. We didn't see that happening in southern Kaduna. We didn't see that happening in northwest Nigeria, in Katsina, in place to protect mosques, and even in places like northeast Nigeria, Borno, in the wake of Boko Haram crisis, where churches and mosques, together with the military barracks, are just bombed indiscriminately. And it crept on to Abuja here, where the supposed fortress like Mogadishu cantonment was also bombed. So we need to have that strength, that sense of security, because the strength of a country is measured by its armed forces, and it's all about protecting the human life.
Not forgetting the political angle at a point. Because some people feel that this prerogative of mercy, the clemency, forgiveness, tabula rasa, is kind of political. Some will say because 2027 is around the corner.
Of course, yes, you can say that with regards to Farouk Lawan. Farouk Lawan is no doubt a popular Kano politician. But for the crisis of the sting operation that was, set to be organized in concert with the billionaire Femi Otodola, Farouk Lawan by now should be one of the most towering figures in Nigeria's politics. There is no doubt that he still commands some followership in northern Nigeria. And when we say northern Nigeria, we're referring to Kano, right? You know, the hotbed of politics in northern Nigeria with a large population. Farouk Lawan is not a pushover. He's a heavyweight as far as some of us are concerned. And to think that they having served 6 years in imprisonment, one would have thought that that settles the case. But to now pardon him means that he's fully back in politics, and everybody is forbidden from referring to him as an ex-convict, because the presidential, if you look at the import of the presidential pardon, the same way it applies to people like Herbert Macaulay, who have long died. You cannot, refer to it anymore. It's as if it never happened.
So he can sue?
No, he cannot always. The exciting part is that he's fully back in politics, so you cannot refer to him as someone who was once convicted. So he can contest for any election now. He can go on the campaign trail. So that you can say it's political, and it will be difficult to be faulted. On the other hand, when you hear a known kidnapper, pardoned, it beats one's imagination, and it becomes such a huge discouragement to the law enforcement, particularly to the police, that risk their life to catch that individual. But what the public may not know are things, the undercurrents, in the sense that deals are reached, especially with criminals, who are able to divulge secrets of how law enforcement is able to actually bust crimes and eliminate certain people and give us a greater peace. So such promises, such overtures, such offers are usually made to call hardened criminals and say, look, we will ask the president, we will advise the president to pardon you if you can name the cells where kidnapping cells across Edo and Delta, for example. If you can mention the key, kidnappers across Nigeria. If you can lead us to the assets, you can lead us to rescuing so number of people. And if the convicted kidnapper actually plays ball, a deal might be reached and the president will grant it pardon. The president does not owe anybody any explanation on why he does some things. But I can tell you that however discouraging it may be, a known kidnapper that is now causing a lot of stir, that is on the list, may have just got it not because he bribed anybody, not because he's said to belong to a drug community, or he serves one big master, but simply because a deal he may have had with the state, and the president decided to pardon him.
But some people actually look at it on grounds of consequences, like you've been talking. The judge now feels, it's my life safe. I convicted this man. Then those who risked their lives, EFCC, NDLEA, pursuing these people and catching them. Prosecutors, they ensured these guys were jailed. Now, don't you think at the point this guy was so I wasted time?
Yeah, that's where it's discouraging. But I'm telling you that many Nigerians have not really looked at it from this point that I'm bringing out. That it could just be a deal. and that if you do what we call balance of convenience, and if you weigh the benefits of his release against his non-release, because his release may have been predicated on something. Now, of course, the National Correctional Service Act does make room for, measuring the behavior of inmates, those who have been convicted or, and are serving prison terms, in order to make recommendations for what we call parole. Parole, why it's not an express pardon, but it includes releasing somebody from detention before the actual due date or the expiration of the term of his incarceration. Now, that only happens because there are reports that are compiled by prison wardens, by prison authorities, for the purpose of consideration of the issuance of parole, which is close to prerogative of mercy. So, and I'm telling you that, in law enforcement generally, if you are able to catch hardened criminals who hold so much value in preventing, further crimes, somehow deals are reached with them, either before conviction or after conviction, in order for the greater good of the society. I think that some of those persons fall in that category, and on that basis, we might just believe that the president has, in supposition, some wisdom that is not readily available to the public.
And that would be justice for victim, justice for society, and justice against the criminal.
Okay, so the criminal has served the term, and sometimes these clemencies go with conditions. And there are certain things I cannot say in public, because there are certain things I cannot say in public. You touched on an important point, that what now happens to the judge? The judge is, the judge's situation is even better than the persons who actually carried out the arrest, who somehow were even offered bribes but refused, because if you are talking about a billionaire kidnapper, for example, and has been arrested, who has a lawyer, who can speak through his lawyer, and the lawyer has certain immunities, which are called privileges, that are including the fact that he is able to negotiate and say, look, can we make available this certain amount of money so that my client can be freed? And then in that part of the money, which goes without saying, that could be bribed to the arresting authority, and then such a person, distinguished officers of the police refuse the bribe, or the officers of the Department of State Service refuse such a bribe. How would those people feel now, knowing that in course of the ambush they laid to catch this so-called kidnapper, they could have been killed? So what would the president have done? If with regards to the justice of the persons this particular kidnapper has killed in course of his own operations. So I think that even though the president does not have any legal obligation to explain to Nigerians, it's important that the president, a spokesman, and the presidency in general should justify the exercise of the president's power prerogative of mercy to harden criminals like kidnappers who have known to have killed policemen, killed innocent Nigerian citizens, and at this time spending just 6-7 years in prison, and they are being asked to go and see no more. It's going to be very difficult for Nigerians to process in the years to come. However, like I said, there are many things I don't want to say, but there are instances which cause law enforcement officers sometimes to take laws into their hands. In course of my work as a human rights activist, I've seen where extrajudicial killings have actually taken place because they fear that if the certain criminal who has been arrested is allowed to press button, in quote, to Abuja to talk to people in the force headquarters, or to talk to people at the defense headquarters, he could be freed. Because they know for certain that this man has been a killer of policemen, they don't wait, and then they exercise that bad judgment of carrying out extrajudicial killings. This happened several times in places where I come from, in Warri, even in other places. Stories coming to us, as human rights workers in southeastern Nigeria, other places like that. So this will now, make these persons who are outside the scrutiny of the public, and I'm talking about law enforcement officers, to take laws into their hand to carry out extrajudicial killings of persons that they know full well have been murderers, who have killed policemen, killed children and women, and they have been total nuisance, and then they wouldn't even want to dare to contemplate that the law should take its course, so that these persons may just either be freed if they pay a very senior and brilliant lawyer, or ultimately, if they are convicted, they could just one day be pardoned by a president who thinks in a certain direction.
Well, we'll just have to go on a short break, and so that you sip a glass of water, and from there we continue. And that is Barrister Frank Tietie, human rights activist, a lawyer here in Nigeria, of course, a dependable one at that. My name is Ben Sherman, and the program is Democracy in Action, and we are in Third Eye Africa.
We're talking about South and the North. You talk about middle belt. Currently in Nigeria, we don't have middle belt. North Central is what we have.
Okay.
And they are included in the North. If the perception is because Nigeria is standing on a tripod, you have Igbo, Hausa, Yoruba, they are the owners of Nigeria. That is a very wrong perception. These are major tribes in Nigeria. Simple.
Yeah.
Nigeria is owned by every single citizen of this country.
If you go to civilized nations, they possibly have, stratified their political parties such that those who play at the national level are there. And at the local level, you have other minor political parties playing there. And it gives sense of belonging to every citizen to be able to contest.
And in fact, once you have joined APC, all your sins are forgiven.
It's okay. It's okay. Off your mic. It's okay.
This is Third Eye Africa TV, exposing crime, savaging the nation.
Welcome back from this break, and I believe we've all had some glasses of water. Now we're talking about elections in Nigeria 2027. Some people say, no, let us do some 2026 to allow for adjudication, so that when cases are finished, then you swear in the president or governors, instead of wasting precious time, government money or public money to handle cases. So what's your take on all of it?
I think we should be approaching a state where elections are really not contested in our country. That's what we should invest on, and it's very simple and possible. The reason is that we can envision a situation where winners of election go home satisfied that they actually lost the popularity game and could go back and recalibrate their strategies to come back. That feeling of, being rigged out is what is fueling this idea that, elections should always be contested in court. In fact, it's not a sign of progress in any way that we cannot organize ourselves to hold elections that will be, as usually said, free, fair, and credible. We've worked so hard on it. I do not think that we should spend so much resources on our elections. We are headed towards a season of electoral reforms. Are we going to, if rather than spend time and precious time that should be for governance to be invested in electoral management, I think that we should rather consider decentralizing the elections. That is, holding the elections, either in phases, rather than holding early elections in the hope that there will be, what we call, litigation or dispute. Part of the reason why Professor Mahmoud, the erstwhile INEC chairman, was quite infamous was the statement that if you're not satisfied, go to court. That's anyhow results that INEC will publish and expect that, well, whatever you do, just go to court. I think that we should raise the standard for INEC, whereby if we say INEC is an independent and unbiased, impartial umpire, we shouldn't think that the court will be better than INEC. Why can't those who are in INEC assume that, role of an umpire that is not biased, that is neutral indeed, and carry out an election and it becomes final, rather than go to court, an election that millions of people will take part in, and then you just find 7 people sitting in the Supreme Court deciding, or 3 people in the Court of Appeal deciding. It's offensive. It should be offensive to democracy. Because when you say democracy, it's about numbers and majority, even though we now know that there are certain ideals that also define democracy. It's improper to think that a pocket of, persons at the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court will not decide for millions of people who should rule them. We've seen several aberrations. Consider the Imo situation where the Nigerians, were forced to accept the miracle of how if the person who came fourth in the numbers of counted as was declared a winner. That couldn't have happened on the basis of an election that was organized, counted, and declared by an independent National Electoral Commission. But that indeed happened in the courts. So it's a major sign of failure if we are now making provisions for the courts to further intervene in our courts. It's a huge disappointment. And at this time, we must raise the national debate to say, no, we should have free, fair, credible elections organized by Nigerians for Nigerians and for the benefit of Nigeria. So we shouldn't. Why should the courts be more trusted? Where we now have to be playing around with technicalities, issues of evidence, ballot boxes ballot papers that were accepted or rejected based on who? Not by persons who were trained to conduct elections, or organize elections, but by judges and who can be easily influenced by one sentiment or the other. So these are times where we should not agree to go the way of least resistance by saying, let's tinker with election timetable. No, I think we should, make our elections more, fail safe, more foolproof, and more failure safe in such a manner that Nigerians will be confident in whoever, organize the election, because it's a systemic thing that cannot be easily manipulated.
So we're talking about some amendments into the electoral
act. Oh, definitely.
So what area do you think needs urgent?
So first, I think the issue in this age of immediate electronic transmission of results is important. A lot of investments were made into the 2023 elections by international, donor agencies working to promote democracy in Africa, by the Nigerian government, by the Nigerian people. And Professor Mahmoud Yakubu promised that there was this thing called, IREV, that will automatically, reflect the results as they come in from the hinterland, from the far away, localities, from the villages, wherever the world elections are. Unfortunately, it didn't happen, and that was the greatest disappointment Nigerians had about the 2023 election. The Nigerians are not disappointed that especially those whose candidate did not win, that their candidate did not win. They were disappointed that the hope for a free and fair election in Nigeria was dashed by a promise that was not kept by Professor Mahmoud Yakubu. So you asked me direct question as to which particular form of reform that we need. Is the kind of reforms we need are those that would enhance transparency, that will reduce human interference in the electoral process. And we should have certain ballots and ballot machines and ballot papers. I still believe we should retain them because there should be always a fallback, mechanism where you are able to verify what has been electronically transferred. So, but I believe that the counting of results should be, should be reduced. The human involvement should be reduced. And it's possible because all you need to do is when you put certain ballots, you slide them to the machine collects it and keeps and then records it. And interestingly, it happened far back in the 80s in this country when people like us wrote National Common Entrance exam. All you needed to do was to shade a certain place and shade it with a pencil. And then you run through a particular machine that scans it and then knows whether you got it right or wrong, and then scores you, and then it also keeps the paper you shaded. So if we could do it as far back as 1983, when I wrote my first common entrance exam, why haven't we advanced in 2025? You're talking about nearly about more than 40 years later. So I think that we should do things that will make our elections more transparent.
Now, time has come for what people will call agenda setting. That when the media will talk, they're telling some people where to go. When lawyers will talk, they're telling some people where to go. Now we have a new umpire. Professor, to us, Anubita, what do you think he should be facing to ensure free, fair, acceptable election?
I think first the congratulations will go to him. It's not easy to be nominated by the president to be showcased as a man of integrity, a man who is impartial, someone who can engender the trust and confidence of many Nigerians in the electoral process. So that's a very good development for him, and I'm happy for him. And I hope he goes through the Senate screening and confirmation as soon as possible so that he can get to work. When he eventually gets to work, what he must do is to, first of all, raise the bar of independence of the INEC. Just because INEC receives money from government does not mean that it's government that should control it. Even though it does receive its money straight from the Consolidated Revenue Fund, he still believes that the government of the day has a way of influencing the way INEC receives its money. So what he must do is constantly give the impression that he's not under the influence of any authority, whether it's the president of the Senate, or the Chief Justice of Nigeria, but he's independent. And after doing that, he must now, build the confidence of Nigerians. This will help him as a legacy that he wants to leave behind. We have come to realize that life is no longer about money, only about money. Life is not only about comfort. Life, importantly, is about legacy. Who will see our country like this? It doesn't matter how we are, living in Abuja, but look at the vast majority of the population living in squalid condition, poverty, unable to eat, and health condition. Health facilities are decrepit, and is this the hope we can give to Nigeria as the best they can get? So, matters of election are beyond counting votes. They actually determine the quality of life for a people. So, if the people want a good life and they want a good leader, but the system fails them because they think that the system denies them good leadership and rather imposes bad leadership on them because of the elections that are that can be easily manipulated. So, it's important that people of conscience, especially at the level of Professor Joash Amofita, who coming in now as the new INEC chairman, must realize that the destiny of this country is in his hands. In the sense that if the people say this is what we want, allow them make their right choices, but do not allow their choices to be stolen when the mandate they have given to someone else, is given to someone, has been taken to someone else. So it's a huge task. He must engender, he must build, he must inspire confidence, and he will do so by his independence. sense of independence, sense of neutrality.
And finally, he should also do this by avoiding the usual go to court comment.
Oh, yes.
Do that by way of avoiding what say carryover elections,
because
inconclusive elections.
Because there is something about a lawyer. Professor George Anapitan is not just a lawyer; he's a teacher of law, and then he also became a senior advocate of Nigeria. That's a huge, responsibility upon him. And as lawyers, one of the things we try to do is to avoid conflict. Unfortunately, the lawyers is supposed to feed from the conflicts that go to court. But advancements in legal practice that make it that there are certain kind of practices where the more you prevent cases from going to court, the higher you get paid. And these are things you're having to do with arbitration, having to do with alternative dispute resolution. So I think that as a lawyer, I'm hoping that he will follow the Electoral Act, if we are still using the same 2022 Electoral Act, to the letter, and ensure that we avoid these unnecessary litigations.
Well, when we live in peace and we shake hands and we accept results, provided they are also acceptable, Nigeria will move forward. And it is here that we have to end this program. Democracy in Action. Our guest has been Frank Tietie, a barrister, human rights activist, all over. He has his own personal studio anyway. We want to thank you for coming to Third Eye Africa TV. My name is Ben Sherman. Keep watching us. As we always say, proudly Nigeria.
Thank you. My pleasure.